Welcome to the show. This is the Magician and the Fool podcast, episode number 63. My name is Dominic. I am one of the co-hosts of the show. The other host's name is Janus, and he will be showing up here shortly. Today we speak with polymath Erik Arneson. Erik is the second personal acquaintance and Portlander we've had in a row on the show, and it's going to be a good one. He's a lot of fun. Erik is a writer, a podcaster. He is a longtime tarot reader and ceremonial magician, and he runs the Arnemancy website, which includes a blog, a store, and his podcast, the Arnemancy podcast, which I highly recommend. He's had a lot of amazing guests on the show. Fairly recently, he did a pretty comprehensive series on the 3 books of occult philosophy by Agrippa, which is fantastic. So yeah, definitely head over to his website, check out his podcast. It's a lot of fun and super informative. In today's episode, we cover the pretty deep topic of the imaginal, the power of images and imagination. This dovetails nicely with other episodes we've done on the topic. Erik has some really unique insights. He's very well versed, and so he adds a lot of excellent food for thought. Before we get into the episode, we want to thank our Patreon supporters. We literally couldn't do this without your support, as there are costs to doing a podcast, believe it or not. So thank you so much for everyone who is supporting us, and if you would like to support us, please feel free to head over to our Patreon page and do what makes sense for you. We dedicate this to Hermes and Asclepius, and may any merits that we accumulate doing this work be distributed to all sentient beings, so that they, together with us, may equally realize awakening. Welcome to the show. We are here with a good friend, fellow podcaster, writer, and Portlander, Reverend Erik of the Arnemancy podcast. Welcome to the show, Erik, finally.
Why, thank you very much, Dom.
Welcome, Erik.
Thanks, Janus.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. I think we were on your podcast, your old podcast, back in 2018, 2019 maybe, and then
Dominic, there weren't podcasts in 19 anything.
Yeah, that's true. Podcasts are like only 20 years old.
That's I've been a fifth of your age, Dom.
Right. So we were on your podcast a few years ago.
It's true.
And we were supposed to have you on our podcast, but for some reason we never did. But here we are.
Well, I don't know if that was ever part of our deal back then, but that was when I was doing My Alchemical Bromance. It was a different world. It was a different age. It was definitely. I remember though that at the time I thought I was so clever because the first question I asked you guys is like, all right, which one of you is the magician and which one is the fool? And both of you got so quiet. You were stumped. And I was like, how do they not get asked this all the time? Like, they have a podcast called The Magician and the Fool, and there are 2 of them.
I know. You would expect to hear that more, I think, but
yeah.
We don't. So congratulations on cracking that code.
I never cracked it. I still don't know.
Little bit of this, little bit of that.
So, for those that don't know you, and I can't believe there's anyone out there that doesn't, but tell us a little bit about yourself, Erik.
Well, I was born in the 20th century.
Okay.
And well, I mean, you know, I am like many of the people you have on your podcast, a ceremonial magician. I've been practicing ceremonial magic for probably about 20 years, like less than 30 probably. I've been a Freemason since the year 2000. I've been into like occult and tarot and weird ass stuff like that since the 80s. And then I've been running the Arneson website, which is a blog and a podcast and a online shop since maybe 2014. And I mean, the Arneson podcast is younger than that, but it's still been going for a while. And yeah, I think it's really hard to talk about myself. It was easier when we weren't recording, when you were like, how should I introduce you? Because then you would be talking about me. But
right.
Yeah. And I guess aside from that, you know, I live in Portland, Oregon. I really love it here. It's a very weird city filled with weird characters, and I really enjoy that about it. And I enjoy bird watching.
Nice.
And long walks on the beach.
Weird characters in Portland. We just spoke to a mutual friend, Arun Joseph.
Oh man,
Reagan.
Yeah, he is. He's one of my favorite weird characters. I love Arun.
Yeah, he is awesome. Cool, man. And you left out the fact that you were John Michael Greer's neighbor. That's important. That's your claim to fame.
It is. It's definitely a claim to fame. I was his neighbor for a few years in Southern Oregon. Yeah.
Yes.
We were in the same Masonic Lodge. Interesting.
Okay, so how did you get into all this crazy stuff? How did this all culminate for you?
So, you know, it happened in stages. I was fortunate enough to not be raised in a Christian church, and so my parents let me do a lot of exploring and reading of weird things when I was young. And I came across my first tarot deck in probably like 88 or 89, and also some Scott Cunningham book about witchcraft, and I just got way into it. And then in college, I started getting into, you know, like Robert Anton Wilson and Philip K. Dick and Principia Discordia sort of stuff. And then after that, you know, it's just a downhill slide from there. Got into Kabbalah. I met people in the OTO, but I never joined the OTO. Started just studying weird stuff. The internet really enabled me a lot. I was part of an online study group called the Tamarisk Crescent that I think started in 2000. I was working through Donald Michael Craig's Modern Magic, which is a book with surprisingly good content given the horrible cheesiness of its cover. And then after that, Freemasonry led me in a lot of really interesting directions, like into the art of memory, which is one of the topics that I've just been really fascinated with, both studying and practicing. And then it's hard to keep up with a culture as it shifts and moves around, especially in the time before podcasts. You know, there's a whole resurgence of grimoires and grimoire magic. A lot of older sort of like Renaissance stuff was starting to come back to the fore and get popular again. The PGM started to get popular. I think people had kind of ignored almost all of the PGM up until, you know, 20-ish years ago. I mean, not people, you know, magicians. Practicing magicians hadn't been paying a lot of attention to it. So when I started paying attention again, all of a sudden there was all this stuff. I'd fallen behind on so much stuff, and it's been really fascinating catching up and learning again and discovering so much. Like the trip through the art of memory involved a lot of study of Renaissance magic and Renaissance philosophy, and in particular, sort of like the way the Italian Renaissance revitalized and changed the way we thought about stuff and the way we looked at things. And then how, you know, everything just came crashing down during the Protestant Reformation. And all of that led me into some, you know, interesting magical revelations, I suppose, about the way the imagination works, the role that the imagination has in the magician's life, or in anybody's life, but magicians, I think, have the ability to, or the opportunities to sort of train a far more potent and active imagination than most people.
Yeah, we tend to relegate the imagination to children, or
Yeah, when we don't, and magicians are guilty of this too. Magicians and New Thought people, we refrain from talking about the imagination and instead talk about like visualization or the astral plane or things of this nature, where we don't really want to admit like this is stuff that's happening in our imagination, because our culture has diminished the imagination so much that it is really very much like a child's thing now.
Right. I mean, when you really think about it, imagination is what, runs the world. I mean, how can you have built the pyramids without imagination? How can you have quantum physics without imagination? I mean, it's impossible, and it's not just for Sesame Street.
Yeah, and I think that as somebody who has really embraced kind of like some Renaissance occult approaches to things, I tend to treat imagination as a more fundamental level of reality than the physical world, right? Like the physical world is an emergent property of the imaginal. So, which is something that's very pleasant to say out loud, and it's pleasant to hope that it's true, but it's also very difficult to live that way all the time because
sounds great.
It sounds great.
Well, can we touch on Henri Caraban was very concerned with this distinction between the imaginal and the imaginative.
The
quality of the imagination as a perceptive function, which enables us to interact with the alam al mithal, the world of the ideas, the Platonic intermediary daimonic realm. And I think that where you seem to be going is a segue into that idea. Would you say that that's correct?
Yeah, I am not always super concerned with that particular line, but I do know that a lot of that scholars who talk about it nowadays, or who have talked about it in recent decades, sort of draw a line between the imaginative and the imaginal, where the imaginal is more purposeful and more a result of like an active imagination, or actively interacting and influencing your imagination or controlling your imagination. And maybe that line is important. I think that as a practitioner, I will say that as a practitioner, it becomes almost a line that doesn't have much meaning, so imagination is it comes out of the the imaginal faculty, which is the ability to use your imagination as an organ of perception, as a perceptive faculty. I guess organ probably isn't the right word to use anymore, but you'll sometimes see that, the phantasmal apparatus of the imaginal faculty. And, like Agrippa's theory of how senses work, how light interacts with the senses, there is no sense that doesn't somehow interact with the imaginal faculty. Like it's basically the focal point through which all of your senses go. Your soul itself sort of lives more in the imaginal world than in the body. And so in order for your soul to receive impressions from senses, it has to travel through, those senses have to communicate with the imaginal faculty. But at the same time, the imaginal faculty is that sense that you use when, like scrying, for instance, gazing into crystal balls, or receiving visions in smoke, or receiving visions of any sort. Like, those are things that sort of happen because you have an imaginal faculty, and because you have, I always like the term that Juan Culiano used. I can't remember exactly where he got it, but the phantasmal apparatus, which I think is the imaginal faculty. I think it's the same thing. It's probably just like a word he took from some Renaissance dude.
So awesome, man. So we're like just diving right into kind of the topic. You're kind of a plethora of knowledge and practice, and so we were struggling with like what kind of topic to discuss with you. And so the idea of image magic came up. We always like to kind of focus on what our guests are really into at any given moment. So image magic is something that you're really into, and I don't think it's something that we've specifically addressed. I mean, we've definitely touched on it for sure,
Yeah, I would love to talk about it. I might have some opinions on it that might make some of your listeners yell at you, but that's cool, right?
That's what we want.
You want listener feedback. As a
Yes.
as a podcaster, I know that even angry listener feedback still warms the heart.
Totally. And I mean, it's not anything new. I mean, as soon as Janice says anything, we have negative feedback coming through.
So I'm just going to keep saying anything over and over again to the podcast. I'm going to try and pepper this podcast with the word anything as much as I can
There you go.
to drive up engagement from the naysayers and would-be haters. Come to my house. I'll give you my address. Maybe you can mail me a book.
They should mail you a book explaining why you're wrong, right?
I would love that. I would enshrine it in my house and masturbate in front of it all the time.
Whoa. This is
Oh, hold on.
This is a family-friendly show.
Family-friendly show.
We have lots of kids listening.
Well, dedicating that to my family of haters.
Where were we?
We were at Image Magic. Image Magic.
So yeah, what is?
Well, I got
Image
it good.
Magic?
That's a great image.
It is a great image. Yeah. I'll talk. Yeah, that's definitely something we should talk about is, okay. So like Image Magic, I think, when most, modern magicians talk about Image Magic, they're usually talking about like astrological talismans.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of, Picatrix, Agrippa, there's tons of source material for these. And that's really good, powerful magic, but a lot of it is sort of like, kind of pre-prescribed or reliant on physical materials or reliant on inscribing images in physical objects and, during, astrological elections and such.
Mm-hmm.
In experimenting with it and in playing around with it, I've discovered that there's a lot, there's a greater depth to how this sort of image magic works. It's not necessarily just drawing a thing on a piece of paper or, carving a rock or however you just decide to put your image into the physical world.
Mm-hmm.
What I have discovered is that the imaginal version of the image, whatever imaginal image you associate with the talisman, is kind of the one that is the most important. Sometimes even to the point where there are, I believe, plenty of types of image magic that you can do without a physical talisman.
Okay. Can you extrapolate on that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, for instance, what Janus just did there by implanting an image in the people he was talking to, right? Like, a lot of this has to do with kind of the sort of like Renaissance theory of how communication works. When I communicate to you, my soul needs to get concepts and ideas through the physical world, through your physical senses, and into your soul. Right? Our souls don't have a direct connection. They have to go through this weird, awkward medium, which means that what happens is your soul, which communicates in images in the imaginal world, somehow pushes those images in reverse through your imaginal faculty, where they are transformed into speech. The speech, I guess right now, since we're miles away, it gets transformed into electronic zinglings and beamed into your ear holes, where your imaginal faculty does the reverse thing, translates my words into new images that your soul then comprehends. So speech itself has the power to kind of like create images in others.
Mm-hmm.
We see examples of this sort of theory in a lot of in texts that sort of relate to images and the theory of how like divine light and divine images work in a lot in medieval texts and stuff. There's like, one of my favorite quotes is this one from this monk who talks about love sickness, and he says that love sickness happens when an image of the target of your love has managed to take up residence in your mind. and you're unable to dislodge it. So in that sense, you've basically created an image and, cursed yourself with a love spell almost. But it still has to do with sort of like an image of the target. It's the image itself that is potent. We also see this a lot in how there's, oh man, hold on. I totally just lost my train of thought. Jaina, say something.
He's on Facebook right now.
Something.
Okay, there we go.
No, I should have said anything.
Anything.
I'm actually not on Facebook. I was looking at.
Are you on Tinder?
No, I don't touch that garbage fire.
When Facebook is a garbage fire, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I was looking up the I was looking up what feast day of what saint it was
on Pornhub.
No, I was just looking at it because it just yesterday was a feast day of Our Lady of Mount Carmel, which is pretty significant for anybody.
Well, that's funny because yesterday was also National Ice Cream Day.
Boom.
Well, I ate ice cream last week twice, which is way more than I usually eat ice cream. So that just shows the imaginal at work.
It does. Absolutely.
So I don't remember where we were, but you lost your train of thought somewhere.
Yeah. I was talking about sort of like examples of images and how images are sort of portrayed in sort of like Renaissance and earlier writing. But I think kind of the more interesting thing that happens is as the Renaissance sort of develops, you get thinkers like Giordano Bruno, who are not only kind of like immersed in the world of magic, but also immersed in the ultimate imaginal practice, which is the art of memory, the sort of crafting of your internal imaginal world, using stuff like, sacred geometry and incredible bouts of like creative processing and creative melding and merging of images together into new forms and new ways of meaning. But Bruno's theory is kind of deeper than that. He has a theory that I don't think was necessarily his alone, although he definitely did a good job enumerating. Is that the right word? That's not the right word. Elucidating.
There we go.
Accusing Bruno of elucidating anything is a lie too. He never elucidated a thing. He made everything way more confusing. But he does talk about sort of this concept of eros or love as being the kind of binding force that held things together. And eros, of course, wasn't just an emotion, but a sort of like cosmic, almost creative force that bound like to like. Eros would explain why, sunflowers have an affinity for the sun, or Eros would explain why, an image of a woman with an apple and a comb would have an affinity to Venus, or why these things would be bound together. Eros was sort of like the love that held things together, in addition to being the force that holds things apart. It was a time before we had really Giordano Bruno was burned at the stake about 80 years before we figured out anything about gravity. We had Kepler's laws of motion. We had Galileo with his explanation of stuff. All of these scientists were very reluctant to talk about action at a distance because it just seemed too occulty and weird, and people were getting burned at the stake and stuff, and it was just sort of uncomfortable for humans in general. But Giordano Bruno was he tried to honey badger his way through philosophy. It didn't work. Turns out he's flammable.
Jeez. I love the way you articulated this, Eric. And it's funny because when you think of Renaissance, these Renaissance theories and philosophies and quote unquote science, you think of something that's outdated and, wrong essentially. But everything that you've said now is very reasonable and I think applicable to modern modern theories of how we perceive things and communicate. I mean, there's nothing crazy about what you've said, in my opinion.
Well, good. I feel like you are not an unbiased audience, so I would be wary of that. I think
Right.
that a lot of the stuff that I am saying probably sounds like a lot of nonsense to people who are sort of like more
True.
grounded in physical sciences. But especially since I believe that the kind of
I mean, when we get into like the rays and things, I could see more. I could see that as being more problematic.
So yeah, and I struggle with that one. I struggle with that a lot. There's no line in Renaissance light between the metaphorical divine light and the physical concept of light, and they didn't have a need or a way to even discover and draw that line, and I don't, and that makes it really, really difficult to kind of look at and take seriously.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, and also they had confusion. When Agrippa talks about divine light, he totally has this thing where he discusses, like the flashlight theory of eyeballs, which nobody knew that light was a thing. They didn't realize that it was particles or anything of that nature. And Agrippa talks about like the sort of flashlight theory of eyeballs, and he sort of uses this in his description of how light filters down from the divine through the planetary spheres and out into the world and allows us to perceive. But at the same time, he's skeptical of it. He's like, I don't know about this. I don't really think that our eyes shoot out light beams. We're not like shooting lasers anywhere or anything like that. Because if that was the case, how come we can't see in a dark room?
Right.
So, so Agrippa expresses some skepticism, not a lot, but a little bit. And so when I sort of look at these things and try to figure out how to work with them or how to reconcile them with the fact that like sometimes image magic works, you have to realize that in the modern world, in the world that we live in, there's a really strong line between the material and the non-material. But there's also, we have a need for explicitly understanding certain things as metaphors. And astrologers do this all the time. We look at like, the heavens and the planets and pretend that there are a limited number of them and pretend that they are moving in specific ways and that they're positions relative to the horizon and all that kind of stuff is more significant than the fact that we're all hunks of rock and gas hurtling a zillion miles an hour through the solar system, right? Like,
right.
Astrology, the fact that astrology continues to work and be popular, even though it is entirely based on a heliocentric universe, means that we can use some of these things as metaphorical systems, while still appreciating the fact that there is like an actual physical, observable, measurable material world that we live in. It's just, the fact that something is observable and repeatable and measurable, that's a property of the material world. It doesn't need to necessarily be a property of every world.
I think a valuable distinction here is that the theory of the rays, Al-Kindi is the one who really popularized this from my understanding.
Yeah.
But it really has roots in ancient Greek ideas. And I think that the rays are pneumatic, they're not physical. So in order to perceive those rays, you have to perceive them through pneuma and the eye of nous. So in a darkened room, could you perceive the rays? Well, not if you're using your physical senses, but if you're using an immaterial percipience, which arises from the subtle awareness, perhaps you could see those rays. And I think that is corroborated by experienced meditators, for instance, who describe experiences of being able to see with their eyes closed.
That would be cool. I don't know that I've ever thought of trying that, but I mean, I guess you also have experienced martial artists who gain some sort of sense of the world around them. They're blindfolded and stuff. Like I mean, humans are capable of doing some weird stuff, which I appreciate.
Right. And so speaking of what humans are capable of, I want to go back to the I want to go back.
I'm like, what do you know, Dom? What do you know?
No.
The $10 million question that has no answer.
That's getting cut out for sure. Kidding.
Constant disappointment to me.
I'm leaving that in. Eric, where are your sound effects? Now we need it. Thank you.
Come on, we got any other sound effects?
Oh yeah, I got tons of sound effects. I've got.
That's a good one.
And
all right, Eric, I need you to, if you're going to be a guest on this show, you need to be using that more. You need to be utilizing those sound effects.
You don't want me to be using my sound effects all the time.
This is devolving into total chaos.
This is
okay, back on track. So
it's
Eric,
it's time to impose order upon a chaotic universe.
I had a serious question.
Oh, okay.
Who has the gavel? Who has the gavel?
Dominic does. You're going to have editing hell with this episode, Dom. I'm excited about this.
I'm feeling like I just want to leave it all in at this point. Just screw it. So, Eric, let's be serious.
Yes, okay, serious.
Bring it together.
Here.
Get it together.
I'm here.
So back to what you were talking about earlier, and I think it's a fascinating topic in itself, worthy of an entire episode. I think the art of memory.
Yeah.
I just want to pick your brain on that a little bit. Like, how do you use that practically, or how often do you use it? Is this something that you utilize often, or is just something that's in the back of your mind as something you could use if you wanted to? Like, how practical is this for you?
So I will say, okay, now the art of memory is amazing. I do not practice it to the level that like memory competitors do. There are people who use the art of memory to like speed memorize decks of cards and speed memorize and do like incredible feats of memory. I don't do that. I use it a lot for memorizing ritual. I use it mostly for occult stuff. Yeah. So, but the other thing is, I've been doing it for a long time. I think I've started working with the art of memory in maybe 2004. I'm not sure. I do know that it's been a weird road. I had to learn a lot about the different techniques on my own. Sometimes I would discover a technique and I'd be really, really excited about it. And then a couple years later, I'd discover that technique was just, written about by some monk in the 9th century. And I'd be like, oh, whatever. Blah, 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 blah. So there is a lot of like really amazing stuff you can do with it. Just in terms of everyday memorization stuff. I'm fortunate in that I usually have a pretty good memory for certain things. I'm really bad at remembering faces and names, but anything other than that, I can get. Yeah, and so for listeners who maybe aren't familiar with the art of memory, what is it, and where did it derive from? Where did Bruno get this? All right, I'll give the really, really brief version. I do have an entire lecture on the art of memory stored in a memory palace if you would like me to whip that out, but it takes like 45 minutes to get through. Oh. No. So the art of memory is, it's old. It dates back to ancient Greece, as far as we know. And it is basically a way of using the imagination to, first of all, create some sort of structure. Usually it's an architectural structure, but there's a lot of variation. It can be like an apartment you walk through, a beautiful old cathedral, your favorite library, a shopping mall, something like that. And inside that structure, you store mnemonic items that allow you to then remember things in sequences. That's sort of the most basic. That's the method of Loki, or the memory palace method. Okay, walk us through an example. Okay, I guess the example that I usually sort of fall back on, the first memory palace that I did, I was actually memorizing stuff out of Agrippa. The memory palace is almost entirely dissolved at this point. Like, I don't remember a whole lot of it, but one in particular. So I was using John Michael Greer's Memory Garden. You can still find his article online. It's been, pirated and copied all over the place. So you can go look that up. And in the Memory Garden, you go and visit these pagodas that are all sort of coded according to the numerology of Agrippa, sort of like the colors that he associates with the various numbers. And so each one of the pagodas has, a specific color. It has symbols on it that are associated with planets or the zodiac or whatever it was using. And then in the pagoda or gazebo, I guess you can put memory images that help you remember things in a list. So, for instance, I was memorizing incenses associated with the planets. And my memory image for frankincense was an image of Frankenstein's monster with a comically large nose. Right?
Okay.
Frankincense.
Okay, got it.
So the images and locations have rules associated with them going back 2,000 years. Locations that the images get stored in need to be like large enough to hold like a human-sized object. They need to be well lit. They need to be distinctive or part of a sequence so that you can put them in order easily. The memory images, which represent the things that you're trying to remember, the lists that you're trying to remember, need to be striking. They need to be, stupid puns like Frankenstein's giant nose is frankincense. They can be humorous. They can be shocking or alarming or horrifying or even erotic. Based on, every person will discover things that work better for them, images that work better or things that, that tickle the memory a little bit more. And then the whole idea is you can string these along, as big as your memory palace is, you can string along these images in the memory palace and remember things in sequence. But all of it is based on training your imagination. So it involves there's a lot of work to set up and get started with this. You have to train the imagination. You have to learn how to make the images. Making the images. I know a lot of people who study the art of memory probably have the most trouble with that. Because you have to suddenly use your imagination to come up with fantastical images that don't exist in the real world in order to have these things work. But, I did it. I ended up learning a number of techniques, some of which I stumbled upon, some of which I read about in books. Like when I first moved to Portland, I lived up in North Portland, in Nopo. And one of the really, really obnoxious features of North Portland, which is the fifth of our 6 quadrants, it was the fifth of 5 back then, but we have since added another quadrant, which totally makes sense. None of the streets in Nopo are alphabetical or numerical in order, right? It's just a bunch of street names. And so I was lost a lot. Back when I moved here, I think I just had like an iPhone 3 and it sucked. So, using Google Maps or whatever the hell we had available back then was very difficult. And in order to get around, I used the art of memory to memorize the order of the streets.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, it's, but also I've used, you can use it for really mundane stuff like shopping lists. You can use it for really important things like you could create a, this definitely is something that Janus should consider. The theater of Abrasax with 365 alcoves all the way around, and you put the saint for each day in each alcove, and you just walk it every day, and eventually you'll never need Wikipedia to figure out which saint day it is.
You're creating a imaginal wikiplex.
I am. I'm doing it in your head too.
I mean, that's helpful. Thank you. But I would, for Abrasax, I'd probably do something like the Egyptian spirits of the Decans.
Yeah, I know that would be good. I don't know. Is there a Christian equivalent to God of the Year?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, that's a whole thing. That's a whole rabbit hole we could go down, but it would take us away from image magic. I will say there was an interesting synchronicity there, the Frankenstein thing, because our last show, zygote was literally used the same analogy with Frankenstein and frankincense. He literally,
We were joking about Frankenstein and frankincense in our last episode.
What? Huh? That's funny. I know that I've used that example in when I lecture on the art of memory, and it tends to get a lot of really, really confused looks from the audience. I know that it's an incredibly stupid visual pun, but it worked. It was like the first image that I ever created, and I still remember it. I still associate Frankenstein's giant nose with frankincense.
so you're like a Promethean magpie of the imagination.
I guess so. I think that image might have gotten out, and it is possibly alive. It's my Karanzan.
Well, it's shocking how bad the typical modern person's memory is.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
Not only compared to ancient man, the men in Greece who were memorizing the entire Homeric epics, but just us maybe 20, 30 years ago, how devolved we've become as far as memory goes.
Oh yeah, I mean, like the influence of technology of this technology is part of that too. I mean, I was just talking about how I still keep maps in my car because I like, and I pay attention to where I'm going, in my environment so that I can remember where I am. I mean, the erosion of memory, and this argument could go back to the dawn of language. There's authors. Who's the guy who wrote about the alphabet and the goddess? I'm not saying I necessarily completely agree with this premise, but there's a theory that says that, just the introduction of language itself caused a diminishment in the memory faculty.
Yeah, and of course we always, I mean, Socrates is the one who, I guess Plato is one who wrote it down first in a way that where he wrote, Socrates hated written language. He believed that writing would encourage people to stop using their memory. And, he was right. We have a lot of documentary evidence and textual evidence that sort of shows that the introduction of the printing press and the spread of literacy was one of the things that helped kill the art of memory.
Yeah, makes sense.
Which is too bad. I really love it. It is here. Okay, so there's a couple things I really love about it. First of all, it's practical. Like, how often do you come across an occult practice that is like useful in everyday life? Do you have the LBRP doesn't help you buy groceries,
right? I mean, can you really say? I mean, it's occult in that it's kind of mysterious
and hidden,
but it's
and weird, and nobody does it. It's literally a cult.
I know, yeah, but you're talking about those kind of memory Olympics that do happen. Are they using these same techniques?
Oh yeah. They are using these same techniques, but they're not. As far as I can tell, most of them aren't really approaching it from a spiritual standpoint.
Right.
But but people do calisthenics. That's basically just fast LBRP, right?
Janice, we'd like you to weigh in on this.
I mean, I have mixed feelings about LBRP in general.
Yeah, me too.
I know. See, the thing is, look, it's really quote unquote cool to talk on GD stuff, but most of the people who want to speak in a negative way about the Golden Dawn don't realize that it's like a college level curriculum, and that the people who do it are actually extremely disciplined. And why would you be doing something like that if it had no effect and did nothing? You know what I mean? So there's that. On the other hand, I think the way you get results from the Golden Dawn system is by really just concentrating on working that system alone, really investing in it. So is the LBRP necessary if you're not within the Golden Dawn and working their system, or even just working their system? I'm not sure. Do I think banishing
Well,
is necessary? I mean, in an Egyptian, I'll make it quick. In an Egyptian context, the Egyptians didn't banish. Like when they did it, not for most of their sacramental theurgy, they did, in Egypt, when you invoke the gods, you didn't banish the gods. You might, an exorcism was used to remove evil spirits, but on the other hand, the influx of the divine into a space would naturally do that as well.
Right. I wasn't trying to diminish the importance of the LBRP. I was trying to emphasize that there are, just because somebody is waving their arms around doesn't mean that they're doing magic. The LBRP is sort of an immersive thing. You have to have the technique. You have to have all the ritual that goes along with it. You have to have all the stuff that goes along with it. The art of memory is the same way. Like you can definitely use it in a fairly mundane way to just get good at memorizing the order of a deck of cards, or get good at memorizing grocery lists, or get good at memorizing, your family tree or something of that nature. But it is also intimately intertwined with the same imaginal techniques that occultists use all the time. And in that sense, the LBRP the art of memory can be used as a magical tool. So, and I've used it as a magical tool in a number of ways. One of them is using an imaginal temple to encode ritual. And, when you do that, you just make sure that the way you encode the ritual, the images you use are images that align with how the ritual is supposed to go, or how the ritual is supposed to be performed. I've used art of memory techniques to explore some of the visualization stuff that like Arya Kaplan suggests for the Sefer Yetzirah. Like some of those like weird ass, huge Kabbalistic tables of letters and the 231 gates visualization, like those sorts of things. Like the art of memory is literally made for those sorts of approaches. I've also used it, for things like correspondences between, the gods and the planets and physical objects, colors, substances on Earth, things like that. And then I discovered at some point, and here's where we can get into dream magic, because there is an overlap, even though I don't really understand it yet. I started to discover that the art of memory interacts with divination in a really bizarre way. I started playing with using the art of memory to memorize the meanings of tarot cards. And I did this using it doesn't really matter. I used some of Giordano Bruno's techniques from his book 31 Seals. 30 seals? Probably 30 seals. I don't know where 31 is. Is that like Baskin Robbins or something? And after doing this, after sort of memory encoding, imaginally encoding the meanings of tarot cards, I started to realize that while I was divining for people with cards, I never needed to worry about which deck I was using. Every card sort of acted as like a shortcut or an index into like an imaginal space that I was kind of like inhabiting as I was divining. And that became very profound to me. I also began to use the art of memory to memorize and create memory structures for astrology. And Bruno talks about this a little bit in one of his seals also, where he talks about dividing the sky up, like staring up at the night sky and dividing it into a memory palace. That's very difficult for me to do because I live in a city, and at night, if I'm super lucky, I can maybe see like 80 stars. Mm-hmm. Although now Starlink's up there. Are we allowed to say fuck Elon Musk on this show?
Let's not.
Okay.
Too late.
I should have bleeped myself.
Let's slow down for a minute, because I feel like we're moving a touch too fast here.
Janice, did you have questions about what I had just said?
I want to hear what Janice has to say about the divination thing too.
That's kind of why I want to back up. I wanted to like maybe focus in on that for a minute and ask you what you ask you to maybe elaborate, and then talk about what you think about the maybe like why that is, or what the machinery of the mind is in that moment, because the mind, not to be reductive, but the mind, the psychic machinery of the mind is an interesting thing. And I think that what you're doing with divination and with memory, there is a correlation going on here, I think.
Yeah. So all the divination that I've done for other people has been sortilege, cartomancy, and I mean, maybe not all, but 99% of it. So I'll talk from that experience. One thing that definitely happens as you grow in experience as a cartomancer is you build, you always kind of like build your own like internal casebook of, combinations of cards and images on cards and what they mean and how you read them. And, especially if you ever get feedback from querents, you might adjust the way your divination works. So you're always kind of relying on memory and on an accumulated amount of experience. But the way that we typically interact with our memory is so undisciplined. We don't have a way of always sort of like visually knowing how our memory works. Pseudo Cicero, who is a man who is not Cicero but wrote a book on the art of memory, back in the day, had this theory of memory, like, a classical theory of memory that was that everybody has two types of memory that they have access to. There's your innate memory, like the memory, your capacity for memorization that you're sort of born with. He, of course, wouldn't have had a concept of genetics, but we could probably say that, your memory is probably a combination of like, genetic markers and blah, 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 blah. Like, some people are really, really good at just memorizing shit. They just remember things. And then the other type of memory is the artificial memory. That's what the art of memory is meant to sort of like train and enhance. And that is, it feels different as you use it more. It turns it turns your mind, your imaginal realm into a strange filing cabinet. And the divination thing, like, in a way, some of it felt like there was a more purposeful and directed kind of like index into experience and meaning and experience that I've had with the cards themselves. And in a way, sometimes it almost feels like your memory palace or your memory images talk to you. So the interaction with your memory, with the images.
What do you mean by them talking to you?
I don't mean it literally. I mean it's sort of like if you depending on the images that you might use to encode the meanings of the cards, when you see them again or see them in different combinations, you're finding relations that are otherwise hidden, that are not always obvious. From what I can tell, it's only helped my ability to divine, but also it also feels a lot like stumbling around in the dark, because I haven't really, honestly, tarot cards and the art of memory did not have much of an overlap. The art of memory was dead by the time tarot cards came onto the scene.
When was the peak of the art of memory?
The peak of the art of memory would have been probably 1500s.
Okay.
So, their tarot cards, as far as we can tell, didn't really start getting used for divination until the 1700s. And the art of memory died fast. The printing press just kicked its butt, and then Martin Luther came along and the Protestant Reformation kicked its butt even harder.
But putting that aside, you're saying that in using divination, it's evocative of areas of your memory palace?
Yes.
Okay.
And partially because, I set it up that way on purpose, but I was expecting only to have the memory palace as a method of remembering the meanings of cards. And I wasn't really expecting there to be such, I wasn't expecting to gain more insight through using the memory palace with divination.
So this was an unexpected thing.
It was unexpected, but I do think it makes sense. I think it makes sense because we know that a lot of scrying techniques use the imaginal faculty. And I know that scrying and sortilege are completely different types of divination, but they're still divination, and they're still, the imaginal realm. Like your imaginal faculty has a link or some sort of connection through the divine light or whatever to a greater and more fundamental realm.
Okay. People use the tarot for path working, and Kabbalistic tarot all the time.
They do.
So there are people who use the sort of confluence of the imaginal and of the tarot. I mean, the tarot is literally, they're literally images. So it does make sense. You're using images. I mean, you could use symbolist art for the same thing. You could use.
Absolutely.
You could use Orthodox icons for this.
And Orthodox icons are absolutely meant to be used that way, for sure. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I haven't really heard. I don't know if I've ever really heard a person who's been doing a lot of path working talking about using the tarot for divination later and having their path working experiences influence how they read the major arcana. But I would really, really love to hear from any tarot people who have had that experience. I think that would be amazing, because I think that there's a lot to explore there.
Moving forward from that, the connection of the art of memory with dreams.
Okay, I have some thoughts. And I have some experiments that I've done, and I have and what I've done is I've generated a lot of questions.
Let's start with some of this. Let's start with some of those questions. Questions are always a great place to start. Questions,
I agree.
Questions generate more questions, but questions generate answers too.
That's true. Yeah. In terms of like the art of memory in dreams, that's a weird one. Dreams, man. I'm not really caught up on like the science of dreams, so I don't necessarily know what like modern scientists are saying about dreams. Just mostly, I hear like a lot of pop science about dream stuff. But the thing that I always sort of fall back on with that is like I must have heard about this in the 80s or 90s, like the idea that like our dreams are how our mind sort of like sorts through the experiences of the day and like files things away in our memory cabinets or whatever. I've been practicing the art of memory now for 20 years, and I'm not sure if this experience really predates that or not. Like, I don't know if I have a really solid memory of childhood dreams or dreams before this, but I have so many recurring buildings in my dreams, recurring structures, recurring temples and houses, recurring locations, that, and very few of them, in fact, I don't think any of them are locations that I have created as memory palaces specifically. But because of how vivid the places are in the dreams, I remember the locations more than like the dreams that take place in them. And some of the locations I can like walk back and explore in my memory. I could probably use them as memory palaces. I don't know if that's healthy, but I haven't done it. but it's a really weird experience. The experience of imaginal places. I'm not really sure how else to connect the art of memory with dreams in particular, but I do think that dream divination and imaginal scrying have something in common.
So in terms of dream divination, let's talk a little bit about that. All
right.
What about moving towards a hermetic form of dream incubation? What do you think? What are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, I've experimented with that a little bit. I've done it in a number of different ways. I've tried some of the dream incubation spells out of the PGM, and those have been they're a really, really difficult form of divination. It takes a lot of practice, more than I've had, in order to get them to be super useful. You have to develop your own dream dictionary, basically, like what do different images mean in your dreams, and there's a lot that you have to build towards. I've also used the dream talisman from 3 Books of Occult Philosophy. Nina Griffin found an election for that a few years ago, so I created the talisman and have tried to use that for dreams. I've had about as much success with that as I have with PGM dream incubation, meaning to say it gives me hella dreams. It's really difficult to extract useful information from them.
Okay. So where have you had some successes with some of these operations, whether it's from the PGM or with that talisman? Like, so we've talked, you've said, oh, well, I'm getting a lot of dreams, but what about, let's talk about your successes.
I think probably the only success that I've had is a dream incubation that I did with Asclepios. Okay. I created a podcast episode a couple years ago that is an Asclepios dream incubation where I've got like Susie Chang reciting the Orphic hymn to Asclepios. I've got some big drowsy music. I've got like recitations of different Asclepios things and sort of leading people in that sort of lead people into kind of an Asclepios dream state. And I've had some people respond that they've used it and had dreams. But again, like, in the abatons of Asclepios back in the old days, you would have like a professional dream interpreter who would come and hang out with you and be like, oh yeah, you're here to dream about your pancreas or whatever, your spleen. And, they would help you interpret your dream and what you were supposed to be doing. And now we're just a bunch of amateurs with no actual Asclepion around to do the dreaming in. But I went and had this strange dream that told me to drink Dr. Pepper. And so I did. I have never been a Dr. Pepper drinker, but it didn't necessarily fix what was wrong with me, but it was a very nice palliative. And then a month later, I met another occultist, Nick Chappell. I'm sure you've heard of him. He's the guy who wrote what is the Kabbalion has new clothes or whatever, like about how the Kabbalion isn't hermetic. Anyhow, I met him in person, and it turns out he was a really heavy Dr. Pepper drinker, and it was just a weird coincidence. It definitely drew us closer as friends, and we shared some Dr. Pepper together.
A great commercial for Dr. Pepper.
Yeah. I would say that at this point, I've been experimenting with dream incubation for a couple of years, and it is the most difficult form of divination that I have attempted. It is the sort of thing where, like, when I notice synchronicities between things in my dreams and things in the real world, they always feel like I can't tell if any of my dream incubation divinations have been successful yet. However, and this is a huge gap in my experiments at this point, the PGM is filled with these yes/no dream divinations where the divination basically have things like, if you go to sleep and you drink it and you dream about an alligator, it's a yes. And if you dream about an oil lamp, it's a no, or something of that nature. I have not tried any of those, nor have I talked to anybody who has. I can't really tell how much dream incubation experimentation is going on out there, but it's way more confusing and way more work than a tarot reading.
I think it comes down to, like you were saying earlier, just flat out discipline. It's not super complicated, especially with those PGM spells where it's like, if you dream of water, then it's a yes. If you dream of fire, it's a no, or whatever. I think you just have to put in the work for
You
that
do.
particular kind of operation. I mean, I don't know that it's that hard.
Well, it's hard in some sense, right? Dream divination, dream incubation, usually involves like a little bit of purification and a little bit of ritual preparation and like clean sheets and,
Sure.
and stuff like that. So there's always like a little bit of preparation, which, and then, it takes basically your night of sleep. You have to like wake up and record dreams when you have them. You have to, so it is difficult. You can't really do it every night. Because you do need to actually get like real sleep too.
Right. But every once in a while,
Yeah.
I don't, if you put in the work to kind of get to that point, like you were saying, like putting together like a dream dictionary, so to speak,
Yeah.
like where you have like certain items or objects that mean certain things and really kind of drilling that home. I mean, I know it sounds like work, but
it is work.
I don't know that it would be prohibitive. I mean, as far as as being like an extreme amount of work, you just have to really put in some effort. Yeah.
I believe that it's the sort of thing that is, it's an effort that takes place over years. Like you have to record your dreams and then what happens, and then you have to start to see if there are correlations between symbols in your dreams and things that happen in the real world. And I haven't really gone through that effort. I know that it would be worthwhile, but did I mention at the beginning of this episode that I'm kind of lazy? All right, let me talk about getting started with dream magic, because I do think that it is one of these things that like people do need to be experimenting more with. Like we need like sort of a crowdsourcing of occultists trying out some of the dream magic stuff. The way that I first got started with it was in Stephen Skinner's book on, his big yellow one of the big yellow ones, Techniques of Greco-Egyptian Magic. He sort of charts out in one of his chapters all of the PGM spells on visions and dream revelation. And so the first thing I did was I went through the PGM and myself for, at least the spells that he outlined. And I kind of made a list of all the different PGM spells, how difficult they would be to pull off. The amount of work that's required, like if there are days of purification, if there are special amulets that are needed, if there's, special ritual ingredients that would be hard to get. So I tried that first. The next thing I did, was I tried some out. I tried the dream thing. It's really, really important to keep a dream journal for this stuff. And I've seen tons and tons of different methods out there for effectively recording your dreams. For me, the one that's the most effective is I just have to keep a notebook and a pencil by my bed so that I can wake up, so that when I do wake up in the middle of the night, I can just reach over and start writing. I've talked to a couple of people, keeping dream journals is pretty common among occultists and diviners. And a lot of people use like the voice notes app on their phone, and they record stuff, and then the next day they like transcribe their notes. So keeping track of that stuff is pretty important. A lot of the dream magic has to do with being in a state of ritual purity when you go to bed, and this includes usually like ritual cleansing, having new bedding. Sometimes there's a ritual that you have to perform, and then I really like these ones where you basically like perform this ritual. It's easy because you can kind of do most of that stuff at your altar. Go to your bedroom, light some incense and maybe a candle, and go to sleep. And you don't talk to anybody about anything between the time of the ritual and the time you go to sleep. I really like those ones. I know that they can be more difficult in fact, I'm not sure if you can do dream divination if there's somebody else in your bed. So that's another thing to experiment with. I haven't tried that yet. And then, so that was sort of the first thing I did, was going through the PGM and trying some of those rituals. The next thing I did was the astrological talisman from Agrippa. He has a dream talisman. Oh God, It's somewhere in book 2, I think. But it's a solar talisman or a solar astrological talisman. I guess I kind of interpreted it as being sort of like an appeal to Apollo for an oracle. Apollo was used for oracles quite often in the old days. And so I made one of those and used that. It seemed to work pretty well as sort of like a bit of a shortcut. Like you didn't need as much ritual and as much preparation, and you would still get good dreams, but the dreams were less useful. I felt like the times that I used it, the dreams that I had were they offered fewer insights. So that might just be a question of practice or a question of me doing something wrong. It's difficult to say. Yeah, and then the third one, the one that I think has been the most interesting to me is this question of the Asclepian dreams. The Asclepius was, at least from what I can tell, like his dream temples were, the most popular way to interact with him for, centuries, or at least a century. And so finding ways to experiment with that, I think, are really important. I don't know that we have any extant rituals dealing with dream incubation and Asclepius, which is why I just sort of like made one up and turned it into a podcast episode. But to me, that seemed like a really good way to experiment. I think, though, it's tricky to, Asclepius is a god who deals with healing and medicine. I would not necessarily rely on dream divination over a doctor, but who knows? Maybe there are useful things that can come out of dreams when it comes to healing. I think that there's a lot to experiment with there, and a lot of leeway.
Do you make so it seems like you're pretty focused on using images?
Yeah.
In magic, right? Mm-hmm. So where do your sources for some of these images come from?
I use the Picatrix quite a bit. But I also have found inspiration for images in more classical sources, and even in other Renaissance stuff dealing with like the art of memory. There are big catalogs of images in Bruno's memory books. There's a pretty good variety of images in the Picatrix and some of the other astrological magic books. I have used dreams as sources for images, actually. The first really serious astrological talisman I did was a talisman to Venus.
Did it work?
Oh yeah, I use it. It's I think one of the best pieces of astrological magic I've ever done.
Wow. So what happened? Let's start from the beginning, go through everything you did, and then get to the effect that you had.
Okay. Well, it was still pretty early on when people were talking about astrological magic and figuring stuff out. And, it was one of the first elections that I did. I have looked back on it once or twice, and I've been like, oh boy, I don't know if I should have used that election. But it was Venus's degree of exaltation in, where is that, Libra? No. Shit. Wherever Venus is exalted.
Pisces?
Pisces? Is it Pisces? Yeah. I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So the election involved Venus being in her degree of exaltation, and so I was sort of following the Agrippa or the Picatrix recipe for creating the image, but then I was sort of mixing in stuff that I'd learned about planetary talismans from both Golden Dawn and Agrippa. So I had I used Agrippa's method for calculating spirit names and used the election to sort of calculate a spirit name. Then I used the magic square of Venus to design a sigil for the spirit using the name that I calculated. So then I had, the angel of Venus and the intelligence of Venus and the spirit name that I'd calculated, along with all these sigils that I put on one side of a talisman, and then the image that I created for Venus on the other side, which was just straight out of the Picatrix, a woman with long hair, topless, with a a comb in one hand and an apple in one hand. There's a couple images. I think that's the one I used. But it was a long process. I didn't have copper or anything like that, so I used green Sculpey to create the talisman itself. And one of the things that was kind of amazing about it is, so I kind of left it so that I would finish building the talisman and then do a consecration ritual over it during the moment of the exaltation. And the rest of the construction I did during the planetary hour of Venus, like the day before. And that night, I had a dream that brought to me a crystal clear image of Venus.
Really?
Yes, like maybe the spirit that I named on the talisman, maybe, but an image that has stuck with me, associated with the talisman ever since, and an image that I kept in mind in my imaginal faculty as I did the consecration ritual, so that I felt that as I was doing the consecration, I was consecrating the image and the physical talisman all at once.
Interesting. Are you comfortable sharing what that image was, or would you prefer to keep that to yourself?
I need to keep that to myself, but it's been remarkable because the image has ended up being to me a representation of the spirit that was conjured into the talisman and has ended up sort of fulfilling the role of the talisman. I walked away from that with this sort of idea about maybe creating images without physical talismans, and I've done that a little bit. I have created a Mars image that I consecrated during a Mars election that had no physical talisman that has also worked.
So just an image in your imaginal...
Yeah, image only, and no physical portion.
Interesting.
I have created a good number of astrological talismans. Some of them have been successful and some of them haven't. Some of them have been on paper. Some of them have been on more permanent things, which I think is sort of an experience that's sort of typical for astrological magicians. A lot of figuring out why elections work and what elections work for individual practitioners is sort of also a learning experience, which requires lots of cataloging and experimentation and success and failure. Sure. So it's kind of funny that I've had imaginal only talismans that have been more effective than some of the physical ones that I've created. But the ones that have been the most effective have always been where there is both an imaginal image and a physical image that work together and correspond with each other. And so I have sort of felt through that experience that the imaginal portion of any sort of magical operation should just never be neglected, which I think the Picatrix tries to tell us, when it says, neglect not the moon. The moon governs the astral realm, the realm where our imagination dwells. It is basically the link between, the divine light and the material realm.
So if one of our listeners wanted to get some tips from Erik on how to construct their own image-based talisman, what would the steps that you recommend in a very clear and systematic way be for them?
I would say the first thing to do...
Whoa, one more thing.
Oh. Okay, one more thing.
Also, does it have to be astrological? Can they make an image talisman that does not have an astrological election, or does it have to be astrological? So I realize those are two questions, but maybe you can weave them together in your adroit manner.
Yes. All right. Well, let's start with a ritual such as the opening of the mouth for statues, right? The opening of the mouth ritual, for listeners who don't know, this is the way that that statues were or I guess are ensouled. I don't know how many opening of the mouth rituals we have that are really, really old, but it's basically how statues of gods or saints or whatever can be ensouled and sort of like embody the presence of the spirit that they're associated with. The opening of the mouth ritual is a perfect place to use an image. You create an image of the deity or saint that you are using to inhabit the statue, and you build it and you build it and you build it and you make it as realistic as possible. I know a lot of people who have done Golden Dawn style magic have used like the practice of adopting a god form, which is absolutely the sort of image magic that I'm talking about, except that you step into it instead of putting it in something else. But with an opening of the mouth ritual, you would create the god form and put it into the statue while you are ensouling it. That image would be an image then of the portion of the soul of the deity that is inhabiting the statue. And so that would be, I think, an example of a place where you wouldn't necessarily need to use astrological talismans to do this form of image magic. Another place that I use image magic like that is with chaos magic sigils, or the creation of servitors using chaos magic techniques. Both of those are excellent areas for image magic. Servitors in particular, I think, are basically made for image magic, and I think that you have a lot of baby chaos magicians out there who accidentally stumble upon these techniques and end up writing on Tumblr about their tulpas and stuff. So if I were going to go step by step, honestly,
Think like you're talking to Dominic, like you're talking to a total idiot.
But I don't think of Dominic as a total idiot. I have a lot of respect for Dominic.
Good, that makes one of us. But just kidding.
Wow, you really put up with a lot of abuse. We have not gone off the rails like this in a long time. Like, you're bringing out something in Janus, which rhymes with anus, that we haven't seen in a while.
There's this character. I don't recommend doing image magic with him, but there's a fascinating German trickster character. He's popular in Germany, or was popular in Germany, like in the Middle Ages and probably well after, called the Eulenspiegel. And Eulenspiegel means owl mirror, which is really cool, because you have the image of the owl in the mirror. And he's this trickster figure, and he's an archetypal trickster. So, he's dressed as a jester. And he's constantly engaging in these insane, wild behaviors, like going into an inn and like shitting on the table and then serving the shit as food to somebody and things like that. Just really insane. And
I think I've seen Dom do that.
That's my point.
Yeah. Okay. I see.
You're getting into this now, Eric? You're getting pulled into the madness.
All right, let's see. Where were we? Step by step, how to do it. Okay, so creating a simple sigil with an image attached is also something that'd be very, very possible. So you could use just the Austin Osman SPAR method of creating a sigil. And then alongside it, of course, one of the places that this will disagree with chaos magic is, a lot of chaos magicians will tell you that a sigil will only work if you forget that it exists or forget what it's supposed to do. But if you put a lot of work into creating the image and really bringing the image to life, there's very little chance that you will actually forget what it's supposed to do. Mm-hmm. But the method of charging the sigil would then involve creating an image that goes along with the meaning of the sigil, the purpose of the sigil, and sort of embedding it imaginally into the sigil itself. We have that sort of thing kind of in reverse already with Goetic demons, where we have a sigil for a spirit, but we also have like the image that goes along with it.
Another useful idea, concept could be a talismanic image.
Yeah, can you explain what you mean by that?
So a talismanic image would be you have the name of typically it's a spirit, an angel, something like that. And each of the letters, say in Hebrew, but you could also do it with Greek, has different things associated with it, right? Like, so you say you have like ox, goad, and fish, and hook, and ox, or that.
And
camel. Yeah, camel. So then you create an image with all those things in it. You can either create a picture with all those elements, or you could create a single figure made up of like with say like, you know, like a fish body and a camel's head with an ox goad around its neck. You know what I mean? And that.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. You have stumbled upon an ancient memory technique that was written about by monks in the 9th century. No, I mean that's actually an even older memory technique. When you abstract it away enough, alphabets themselves are memory images, and one of the techniques in the art of memory many of the techniques do involve sort of like creating your own memory alphabets, which can be really useful in creating composite images like that. And that's one of the things that like Bruno's lists are really good for. I think he has one of his lists in De Umbris Idearum, which is usually translated as On the Art of Memory. There are a couple translations of that available, including one by Scott Gosnell, who's a amazing thinker and fun dude. That's absolutely something you could do. You could, if you created a memory alphabet ahead of time, like associating letters with specific images. It doesn't necessarily have to be sort of the traditional stuff like A, ox, B, house, that sort of thing. It could be something of your very own. And in fact, one of the things that I have done with that is I have a memory alphabet that I use when memorizing Masonic ritual, where each of the letters of the alphabet is associated with a Masonic symbol or a Masonic character. Because I've found, especially with any sort of magical work, it helps to stay in theme. And please, if you're a Freemason, do not yell at me for associating Freemasonry with magic. But, you know, the techniques are similar, and the memory techniques are very similar. So yeah, like, you know, if you're a PGM magician, you should create a memory alphabet associated with the Greek alphabet. If you're doing Kabbalistic stuff, create a memory alphabet associated with the Hebrew alphabet, that sort of thing. And those can be used specifically to create images for spirits and sigils.
You could do it with the bind rune. You know what I mean? You could do it with the bind rune. You get, you know, Berkano, you have a birch tree, Uruz, you have an ox, you know what I mean? So Wilo, Asilo.
Yeah.
You have the sun, so you put those together into a visual image that you visualize along with the bind rune. But so basically you created this image one way or another. How do you energize it though? I mean, not we all, but you know, many of us who are older are familiar with the classic chaos magic tactic of masturbation and orgasm, so we can pass over. Well, what are some of the other techniques you can use to energize one of these images, animating it?
Usually when I don't usually use the masturbation technique when I'm doing sigil charging. I usually create a ritual of my own, but because I got started with Donald Michael Craig, visualization techniques were kind of like hammered into me pretty early on. So I usually use visualization techniques, you know, imagination, you know, my imaginal faculty to first spend some time meditating on the image itself, creating it so that it feels real and as detailed and lifelike as possible in my imagination. One secret, I don't think that this is necessarily something that everybody will have trouble with, but you know, remember to let them move. Your imaginary images are not static pictures. They should be allowed to move and act and be their own thing. But you then visualize it as sort of like merging with or being a part of the physical sigil itself. For me, it helps a lot to have some sort of ritual that goes along with that. I almost every ritual I do, even if it's not astrological, is somehow tied to some kind of planetary magic thing. So I always have, incense and candles and stuff that I associate with the task at hand, with the magical task that I'm trying to accomplish. So I know that's going to be different for everybody, but that's what I do. And I think that's so. Those two techniques, both the opening of the mouth and the associating of and the creation of images to go along with sigils, are really, really good ways to get started. I think astrological magicians who are already working with talismans have probably already stumbled across a lot of the secrets of image magic associated with talismans that they're creating for themselves or people around them. But I think that if you, for instance, are buying astrological talismans from magicians who have created them and selling them online, you should definitely consider reconsecrating them with imaginal creations of your own. I think that might be useful.
Cool. Yeah, Eric. So I want to get your thoughts on the importance of focus and concentration too, because you just mentioned the fact that your images should be allowed to move and kind of live, but that takes a sort of a capacity for focus and being able to stay kind of in the moment with that image. Oftentimes, I think, if you lack that focus, you're seeing images. If you're doing a visualization, for instance, you're seeing images in like a super slow kind of stop motion kind of manner where. Yeah. Rather than just kind of a continuous living kind of picture, if that makes sense. Do you feel like that's important?
It does. I think that is important. I think as with any skill, it takes practice and it takes. Okay, this is going to make me sound extra nerdy. Where's Janus? He's going to want to hear this.
Oh, he's charging a sigil right now in the bathroom.
Uh-oh.
We can wait if you want.
No. I'll talk about this. I kind of associate visualization and learning how to use the imagination with learning math. At least for me, I know that a lot of people have enormous amounts of difficulty with math, but for me, I was told all my life that math was hard. Basically it was Barbie's fault. Barbie was always on TV saying like math is hard. And when I took math classes and I went in there with this idea like, oh my God, this is going to be so difficult. This is going to be so hard. And then you get in there and you learn the technique and you're like, this is it. Yeah. This is what everybody was afraid of. This is what everybody was telling me was going to be impossible. I feel like imagination is the same way. I read online a lot of accounts of people who struggle with visualization, and I think a lot of it is because they're not really like we live so embedded in the material world, and we exist in this society that has this like material first worldview that is just hammered into us from birth. We aren't used to trusting our mind's eye. We aren't used to trusting our imagination to do its thing. So I've found that a lot of the times as I have moved forward with the ability to visualize and the ability to use the imagination, a lot of it comes down to kind of like just trusting my imagination to do the work once it's got the information. I mean, if I want to imagine an apple, I know what the hell an apple looks like. I don't have to sit there and focus on it until the apple is perfect because the apple will be there. You know how an apple smells and how an apple tastes and what color it is and how weird the skin feels and all that kind of stuff. So it's not necessarily, all of that stuff is already present in your innate memory, and you can just let that percolate up and fill the imaginal space that it's supposed to be filling. And I found that for me, at least, a lot of it was setting it in motion and letting it do its own thing without trying to force everything. Yeah. But it is, again, a question of practice and sticking with it. You have to just play with it. It's way easier when you start to realize that, your imagination gives you basically the power of a god in your own mind, and you can just do whatever you want with it. And when you turn it into more play than chore, I think that helps a lot.
I mean, it's common in the esoteric Buddhist tradition in Tibet and in Japan to create, images. You're describing essentially a very similar process to what's used in esoteric Buddhism.
Yeah.
Because when we speak about European traditions of magic, you're dealing with the continental, you're dealing with the northern, you're dealing with the Mediterranean, and then you're dealing with the Eastern European. There's different approaches in each, but there's also pan-European modalities as well. And then, but in the southern, in the Mediterranean tradition, visualization really isn't something that is considered necessary. The power is typically in the vibrations of the sound, in the images that are created by the hand, whether it's a statue carved out of wood, or any number of images. The idea, I think, that is that the power is coming from the divinities rather than the formative image making faculty of the suke. And so I think it's interesting that you're with perhaps just through your own magical development, finding an affinity for the imagination, the power of the imagination. Now, I think that that's informed and inspired by Renaissance approaches as well. But I do think it's interesting if you think about the contrast, because really, if you look at many ancient sources, whether we're looking at, I don't know, I love the PGM, but I hate to mention the PGM because of all of the half-wits on Facebook. But
maybe you need to get off Facebook.
Maybe I do. That's true. But I have people calling me like on Facebook Messenger, leaving messages where they're like sobbing and crying and screaming, asking me to not get off every time I say I'm going to get off Facebook. No, but seriously.
Wow. I didn't realize we were dealing with the Taylor Swift of Facebook here.
I'm the Cabaret Voltaire record of the Taylor Swift of Facebook.
So here's the thing about that, though, is that we know that I'm not going to say that we know. I feel like we've got pretty good evidence, such as like the stuff that Ioan Culianu mapped out in his book Eros and Magic in the Renaissance of how the approach to imagination changed in the Western world to the point where like it was taken for granted. Imagination was an imaginal experience of the world, or an experience of the world where the line between the imaginal and the material was hazy, was kind of like the default mode, at least for maybe 400 to 600 years leading up to the Protestant Reformation. So when a lot of times we see Renaissance texts, and maybe even stuff older than that, talking about magical techniques, I think that the imaginal side of it was probably taken for granted. Mm-hmm. It didn't need to be explicitly spelled out. And we do have some evidence of this in earlier mystical texts, such as like Augustine talking about his encounters with God in the Gardens of Memory, or mystical experiences that seem to be mapped out as memory images in the Sefer HaZohar, or Teresa of Aguila's, crystal palaces, or things like that. Like we have these images that seem to blur the difference between vision and imagination and the material and the divine in sort of like some really interesting ways. And sometimes it's one of those things where, like, if you start to get familiar with the language, you come across it in really strange places. Most of the examples that I have are things that have been pointed out by scholars, but also, I know how nerdy the two of you are. I know that sometimes you like to pick up a super old book and read through it and be like, oh yeah, This is my magic. But you'll come across stuff every once in a while where you're like, hold on a second. And a demon just like walked up and started talking to him. Like, how is that possibly a thing? Man, a great example that I read recently was a book about the Ars Notoria. It was a scholarly book, but somebody was sort of like analyzing like one of these texts about this monk that had been practicing with the Ars Notoria and the sort of like imaginal experiences he had that sort of began with dreams and ended up being sort of these almost like physical visions of, you know, demons and Jesus and things like that. Like we know that the imaginal experience bled over into the material experience for people who existed in a pre-Enlightenment Europe, at least. So I'm not sure that I'm innovating as much as I am afraid that I am most of the time.
You're less innovation, more excavation.
I think that's what I'm doing. It's, you know, I'm not enough of a scholar to prove it.
I mean, Plato said all knowledge is remembering.
Yes, anamnesis. It is one of my favorite things from Plato.
So it's like a gnosis. Because if you trace memory back far enough, you reach God.
Yeah, and Plotinus also talked about that. The theory of knowledge being remembering is beautiful. I believe this is in Phaedrus, but I am super happy to be wrong about this. But basically, Plato talks, or you know, he has Socrates talk about the fact that like no new knowledge is actually being created. All things that are available to know already exist or are already part of the divine plan, or are already there. Our separation from the divine, like when we incarnate into the material world, is so traumatic that our soul is blocked off from the divine, omniscience. And the act of remembering the act of knowing is actually our soul remembering. It's sort of like the higher form of our accessible memory, and that represents sort of like our soul gaining more access to the divine. And this concept actually fed directly into the concept of universal knowledge in the Renaissance, which has a much cooler Latin or Greek name that is escaping me at the moment. Pansophia. That's what it is. Sort of like the belief that one person could fit all knowledge in their mind and thus sort of achieve a level of, Renaissance divinity.
This is kind of the origin of the idea of Renaissance scholasticism. But if you really consider it carefully, I think it's not so much that one person can fit all knowledge into their mind, but it's more, I think, akin to what Hermes says in the Hermetica about expanding your soul to the size of the universe, expanding your soul, meaning suche, to the size of the universe, to the size of God. And so it's not so much fitting it into your contracted relative mind so much as making yourself equal to God. And then all knowledge is accessible to you because you've reached the macrocosmic state of awareness.
Right. And I can't remember if that was CH10 or 12, I think, where he has that bit in there. Yeah, and that was definitely something that really spurred on some of the art of memory practitioners in the Renaissance. There was... I'm not sure that they necessarily had the right approach, but there were attempts at creating memory palaces that could be catalogs of everything.
Oh, yeah.
And that seems like the wrong way to go about it, but it was impressive.
Okay, so I think an interesting sort of dovetail of what we've been talking about, what you've been talking about, is the hypnerotomachia polyphily.
The hypnerotomachia polyphily. Oh my God, the hypnerotomachia.
Man, I got you strong.
Okay, I'm not going to talk.
This is one of Eric's.
I am not going to talk about this for an hour.
No, just talk it up. Talk it up.
The hypnerotomachia polyphily is literally a dream. Okay, I mean, for those in the audience who don't know what it is, this was a book published in 1499 in Venice by Aldus Manutius, probably written by the monk whose name I can't remember at the moment. But the book, its title probably means The Strife of Love in a Dream, or Polyphilo's Love in a Dream. And it is written in this weird pidgin of like 6 languages. So you had to know how to speak like 6 languages in order to read it. But the book itself is this fantastical, intimately detailed, imaginal voyage through this bizarre pagan dream realm filled with just the most amazing descriptions of architecture and beings and flora and fauna and emotion and experience. It's gorgeous. It is one of the most delicious books that has ever been written. I can talk it up a lot, but that's probably enough. That I have probably talked it up enough already. I believe that the Hypnerotomachia was written as an imaginal memory journey, intended to be sort of encoded in the mind as you read it.
Okay.
I know that it was extremely influential. There's a theory. Jocelyn Godwin theorizes that the third of the Rosicrucian tracts, the Chemische Hochzeit, was basically just the Hypnerotomachia dumbed down. I think also that the early English Royal Arch degree in Freemasonry was a similar thing, sort of a dumbing down of the Hypnerotomachia, or possibly of the Rosicrucian tract.
The chemical.
But it's, the chemical. Yeah. I'm sorry. I said it in German. Chemical Wedding. The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz.
Now, what's interesting, to just briefly interject, is it's kind of touching on everything you've discussed so far. Number one, it's talking about the dream aspect. Number two, it's talking about the sort of Renaissance image magic aspect. And then the third aspect is Venus, who's very present in this text, as she is also in the Chemical Wedding. You know, Dame Venus is really the conductress.
Oh yeah, and the Hypnerotomachia is a love story. You know, I mean, it's absolutely everything that happens in there happens because of the bonds of love, like drawing people together. And that whole theory of love, I mentioned this, an hour ago or whatever. That whole theory of like love sort of being like the binding thing between the image and what it represents, or the image and what it pulls divine light from. It's just sort of reflected and compounded in a text like the Hypnerotomachia. Yeah, I think. I'm glad that you brought it up. I think about that book frequently. It is dear to my heart. I really love it.
Can you talk a little bit on it? Why it's dear to your heart? Like what is it about this book that you love so much, and how does it relate to your practice?
I don't necessarily concretely relate it to my practice as much as I use it as a book to kind of like sink into and kind of live in. You know, you can open it up and you can read it, and you can walk along with Polyphili on his journey and just have the experiences that he's having. The way that the book is written, you can create, like to the meter, to the centimeter, sort of like the areas that Polyphili is experiencing, the things that he's seeing and exploring, and like the, everything that he experiences, you can imagine along with him very clearly because of the way the book is done. Another book that has that effect for me is a more modern one, Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. Again, it's a book where this one is a little different in that it's still a book that is meant to invoke images in the reader's mind, but the images are presented in a sort of like strongly metaphorical sense. And the book itself, as it goes along, sort of reveals that the two main characters, Kubla Khan and Marco Polo aren't even speaking the same language, but that the images are like passing between them just through like the power of communication.
Well, and that's interesting too, because really these images are a means for us to communicate with the spirits that are in the mundus imaginalis, the daimonic realm.
Mm-hmm.
They may or may not understand our language, or maybe even when we're using verbal language for them, it's perceived visually, so that when we use the visual language, a language of images, we are entering into that medial space and using a language that is universal rather than particular.
Yes, absolutely. That is my thesis, and I implanted it in Janus using an image.
Or
no, I.
Well, right, and it brings to mind, hieroglyphics, obviously.
Oh yeah. I really do believe, though. I really think that when you kind of like follow these things to their logical conclusion, you discover that alphabets are mnemonic devices that were originally images, and hieroglyphs just didn't change as quickly.
I mean, and it's amazing to me because this book is relatively unknown to most people, yet it is such an incredible work historically, even. But when we talk about imagination and dreams and magic and the influence perhaps on Rosicrucianism and
Mm-hmm.
all of that, it's inevitable that you're going to come across at least a mention of it. And if you examine it, it just has so many levels to it. But again, this goes back to Venus, right? Like we have Venus in this, we have Venus in the Chemical Wedding.
Yeah, we have Venus as the mother of Eros. Eros being the binding force that Bruno talks about. Like
when we're talking, even when we're talking about late Platonism, so-called Neoplatonism, mm-hmm. we have Proclus elevates Venus to essentially the status of the world's soul, and she becomes more than just an image of even Eros, but literally the sort of transcendental unity of all things is in this cosmic form of Venus. Mm-hmm. And then you have Eros as the daemon magnus, who is both sort of God and demon. And if you think about the way that love affects us, it exalts us to the most sublime heights, but can also devastate us and make us fall like the angels into the most abysmal depths of hellish suffering.
Yeah. When Bruno talks about it, he sort of uses these examples of, Eros is what binds the planets together and keeps them close, but at the same time, it drives them apart. Like you don't want too much Eros from the sun, or you're gonna get a little toasty. But so it's sort of a binder and a limiter. It's interesting how that sort of this we're leaping back and forth across millennia here, but I'm just sort of reminded again how interesting it is that there were these occult theories of things that were eventually explained by gravity and conservation of momentum and angular momentum and that sort of crap. But
But ultimately, we could say those are expressions of the principles that were perceived by these seers.
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh, I totally agree.
So for listeners who want to learn more about all these topics that we've been talking about, especially just now,
I recommend drugs.
Do lots of drugs. And you're all set.
Yeah.
No, but seriously, Erik covers these topics pretty extensively on his podcast, the Arnemancy podcast, which is great. You've had a lot of awesome guests on there. Highly recommend it. So where can people find what you're doing? Because we are running a little bit long.
Really? We've only been recording for 3 hours.
Have we been recording for 3 hours?
Right. Close to it. Yeah, I thought Joseph was our record holder, but Erik's decided to give him a run for his money.
Well, you're gonna.
So yeah, where can people find you? Because you've got a lot of fascinating ideas and a lot of educated educated ideas and thoughts, and just a lot of fascinating guests, like I said, on your show. So tell us a little bit about where people can find you and what you have to offer.
Almost all of the cool stuff that I have on this topic is on arnemancy.com, arnemancy.com. That's where I've got my podcast, where I've got lots of blog posts. The art of memory stuff in particular bleeds over a lot into the work that I've done on Freemasonry. You can just Google my name and put Freemason at the end and you'll get stuff there, but most of it's in print and not available on the internet. And then, yeah, I would say that in my podcast in particular, I have 3 or 4 episodes about the Hypnerotomachia polyphily that I've done. Some of them with some just like really profound thinkers who have sort of explored the way the Hypnerotomachia polyphily was actually used by people at the time. And then also sort of like expanding that into this concept of sort of like multimedia, immersive, imaginal landscapes that are sort of presented in Renaissance texts. I also have a whole series on Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, and I dive way more into Agrippa's approach to divine light in that. And you can find that at arnemancy.com/Agrippa. There's like 9 episodes there. And then also I have a pretty good number of episodes where I interview Scott Gosnell, who is translated more Giordano Bruno than possibly anybody else alive, and it probably hasn't driven him too insane. He's very erudite, and he has got a much different approach or take on Bruno than I do sometimes, so we don't always agree, and that's probably fun to listen to too. So those are the things that I would advise. There's a search on my website, so you can just search for stuff. I try to make it easy to find.
Cool. And so if it was for someone who wanted to start, because we did talk about the art of memory quite a bit, where would someone start?
I think there are 2 places that I would start. One, you can get on YouTube and search for like art of memory or memory palace techniques. There's a huge community of people who do it competitively now, but their introductory tutorials are amazing, and they can get you up and running really, really quickly.
Awesome.
If you want to expand on that, John Michael Greer does have his that article by him is available in lots of places on the internet, and I'm sorry, John Michael, for revealing that, but yeah, you can search for Ars Memorativa and John Michael Greer, and you should get a copy of his article. And he has a really, really simple, entirely imaginal memory garden that he walks you through creating and populating and stuff. And that's a really good way to start.
Cool. And you do classes and things like that too. Like what do you got going on?
Oh yeah. I have a lot of pre-recorded classes on the art of memory and tarot, and also lectures on the art of memory on my website. And then also some stuff about planetary magic, which I'm also really into.
Awesome. Well, thanks, man. This was a long time coming. This was super fun and fascinating. So glad we did this.
Thanks. That was a lot of fun. I'll talk to you guys soon.
Thanks, man.
Bye.
Right, that was Erik Arneson of the Arnemancy Project. He runs a podcast. He has a website. He writes. Brilliant individual, polymath, eloquent, intelligent person. I think he's a good follow-up to our prior episode. And interestingly, both of these fellows are also members of the ever-elusive Hermetic Federation in Portland. So maybe this is also the influence of Hermes. You guys got some information-dense and information-rich episodes, 2 in a row. If you listen closely, you'll probably be able to excavate all kinds of useful magical gems, theurgic gems that you can implement in your own practice. We try and retain an emphasis on practicality in our episodes to sort of counterbalance the density of the information that's presented. It is sometimes necessary to be patient and listen closely when you have someone as intelligent as Erik because there's a lot being said and a lot being shared and a lot being given. And for everything that's said, if you read between the lines, you'll probably get even more. I'm grateful that he came on. It was really interesting. And what a foray into the applications of the power of the imagination and memory.
Yeah, absolutely. Super glad we had him on. And you're right. Great addition and great follow-up to our episode with Arun, Joseph. Interesting that they are both in the same city, and we're friends with both of them, and they are aligned with similar interests. And yeah, this episode really went into the deep end in a good way as far as the imaginal realm, the imagination, and ties in really nicely with lots of episodes that we've had in the past, and follows a theme that has been running through, I'd say, most of our episodes, really. And it's just nice to be able to talk with someone of such a brilliant mind, and just humble, nice guy, fun guy, just a blast to talk to. So glad we finally did it.
And Erik also is a professional tarot reader, and from what I hear, he's good at what he does. So additionally, if you're interested in a reading that may be edifying from someone who clearly has some very interesting gifts and talents that he's developed, you might want to consider getting a reading from him as well. He does all kinds of things.
Yes, absolutely. He's very gifted in that respect as well. So cool, man. So glad we did that. What do you got for your book review this week, or this episode?
The book I have this week is a landmark book. It's literally, in my opinion, a landmark text that is historically very important. It is by a absolutely wonderful man, brilliant individual. I consider him an exemplar in many ways. Truly good person, in my opinion. His name is Matthew Ravignot, and Right Reverend Matthew Ravignot, and he is a bishop in the French Gnostic Church. Matthew has engaged in painstaking study and translation of source materials of the French Gnostic tradition. This book is the sort of summation thus far of his work along these lines, and it's called The French Gnostic Church: Doctrinal and Liturgical Evolution. It's based on hitherto unknown, untranslated sources, sources in libraries, sources in archives. And this is the first ever English language book to reveal in a way that is comprehensive and clear how the first Gnostic church in modern times came about, developed liturgically, doctrinally, organizationally. It goes into the sacramental life of the church, and it's divided into 4 parts, which correspond to the 4 eras of the church. It's very detailed, and it includes documents that have never been translated into English. It's for anyone interested in the Gnostic tradition, especially in its flowering in the modern age, in this age. This is the book. To me, it is essential reading if you're interested in these subjects. Again, this is not so much about Gnosticism of the Nag Hammadi library era. This is about the flowering of Gnosticism that occurred a little bit later. So it goes into people like Jules Douanel and Bricot. It goes into the Church of Constant Chevillon, Robert Ambelain, and he shows how the liturgies developed, how the orientation towards the ancient Gnostic perspective was developed and expressed through these lines. He talks about some of the seminal figures, which included prominent people in initiatic orders, Masons, symbolist poets and artists, Péladon, people like this. He goes very deeply into it. And it just is so illuminating. It's so interesting. It's fascinating. When I was younger and I became intrigued by the French Gnostic Church, there was very little available to study. And what was available was sometimes of a dubious nature. Now we have a resource in the English language, which will be interesting to people who are of an esoteric persuasion, people who are interested in the history of it, people who are interested in the sort of dovetailing between people in initiatic orders and, say, the 1800s and the artistic world of that time. It's really it's essential, in my opinion, essential reading for people interested in these things. Matthew himself is an intriguing person as well. He of course is a Gnostic bishop within the French Gnostic Church, but he is also deeply involved in martial arts and heraldic subjects. He's the founder and head sensei of the not-for-profit Daijiken Dojo, the Great Compassion Fist Dojo, and he has a 7th degree black belt in traditional Okinawan Goju, Ryu, Karate, and Kobudo. He leads a Gnostic parish and a Martinist lodge with its inner orders in his home city. And as I said at the beginning of this, he is a truly, truly wonderful person. So he's very upright and he has great integrity. So you can count on the fact that what you're reading here is not peppered with fanciful speculations or bent to fit a particular worldview. He deals with this in a scrupulous and rigorous way, and his translations are very good too. He clearly has a command of both the French and the English languages, so it flows very nicely. He understands the nuances of the French language very well, and so he's able to translate those into it. He's written a couple of other books, The Original High Degrees and Theurgical System of the Masonic Elect Cohen Knights of the Universe, and A Manual for the Gnostic, Doctrines, Practices, and Prayers of the Esoteric Christian Tradition. He's also written articles in Masonic, esoteric, martial arts, and heraldic subjects. Again, this book is called The French Gnostic Church, Doctrinal and Liturgical Evolution. It's recently gone into a second edition where additional material has been added and where some revisions have occurred. I strongly recommend this. It's not going to necessarily be something that's going to appeal to people who are interested in this sort of tabloidistic, spirit science, internet Gnostic nonsense. But for those people who have a passion for the actual tradition, this book is essential.
That was quite a commercial. That was great.
Well, I have so much respect for him and so much respect for this book. It's filling a much needed place in the history. It's irreplaceable. It's truly a landmark. It's truly monumental, and I cannot recommend it enough.
All right, cool, nice. Sounds amazing. Thanks for that again. Thank you to all our listeners. We appreciate your support. Please subscribe to us on all the platforms. Give us a like, give us a review, all the normal things. And we'll see you back in the next episode.